Welcome to another Down the Hatch podcast. This is a repeat or a part 2 of the first podcast we had called SLP So White. This is SLP So White part 2. That is French for two because I'm multicultural. So my name is Ianessa Humbert and I'm one of the co-hosts of this podcast. Alicia, introduce yourself.
My name is Alicia Vose. I'm a postdoc associate here at University of Florida in the McKnight Brain Institute. You guys all know me. I don't need to talk.
Jess.
Hi, my name is Jessica Forbes. I am a doctoral student at Howard University, currently doing my research with Ianessa Humbert at the University of Iowa.
Anu.
Hi, I'm Anu Subramanian. I am a clinical educator at the University of Iowa, and that's it. That's all there is to know about me. That is it.
So in case you guys were, the first time we did this podcast, we had to say who is what color. It's obvious. Oh, by the way, I am not Beth from This Is Us. I just feel like I need to keep saying that because I keep getting these messages from people showing me videos here of like, how are you guys not kindred spirits? That's not me. I'm not married to Randall. And Jess is obviously also Black. Leash, are you white or not today? What's going on?
Like, what do you think? Painfully? Like, about my scale of how white I am? Like,
before I was like, how white are you? Now I'm just like, girlfriend's white.
Yeah. Especially being quarantined, it's like extra special right now.
Ooh, that's right. That's right. Yeah, the bronzer didn't quite take, eh?
No, not so much.
All right, so why are we back here talking about this issue? Well, the reason we're back here talking about this issue is because we got so many comments and questions, even up until, was it last week, guys, that I sent you the most recent one? And I think this podcast aired in like February or something like that. So this is one of those podcasts that has induced quite a number of people who said, hey, I have issues with a lot of the things you said. So I'd like very much to go over some of the things that were said about the podcast. There are so many things I can't get around to, but that's okay. That's what the co-hosts and guests are here for, to talk about this issue. This is probably going to be one of a line of conversations on this topic, and we're happy to be the ones to have it. So what kinds of things were people saying? Well, I have my notes in front of me. I never knew how much I needed to hear from my diverse group of SLPs. I always felt like I did not belong. So we got a lot of emails and private messages from individuals who are not white in the field, who didn't realize that their situation was carried through from other people. We also got a lot of people who commented and said, I didn't even know that this field was mostly white until you said so, because I did my PhD, I did all my work in like Washington, D.C., and I just saw a few people who weren't white, or I did my work in California and everybody was Latina. So that was a surprise to me. So those were the kinds of comments that we got. Also, I'm so grateful you're getting this conversation going. It's so needed. So a lot of people are saying, this is the first time I've heard anyone really talk about this. This is a start of the conversation. This is a very needed conversation. Quote, bringing more people of color into the field of speech pathologies is also a social justice issue, because that means that more people of color will have access to good career paths that create more stable environment for them, their families and communities. Other comments include, let's talk about the whiteness in our field. Interestingly, we got a number of people who are saying this is amazing, but what about some of the other issues? Like if you ever talk about the gender gap or even diversity, again, as a male SLP passionate about this topic, I'd love to join. And this is a quote, because I feel like I need to say that. If you ever need a homo SLP for one of your diversity talks, let me know. Or a Southern male, I'm all for it. If you want a male opinion, another comment. Here is one that was sort of quite different and a little bit more conceptual. What if non-white people want a non-white SLP? Shouldn't it be acceptable, given research showing that they're treated poorly in healthcare? Is a comment that Alicia Vose made, so bringing up that comment. And then they say, but what if a white person wants a white SLP? Would they then be considered racist? I'll continue. The main points that we've been getting is, one, we want more. This is a start. What about all of the other groups that are underrepresented? Are you going to talk about those? What is ASHA doing? And if people are just good clinicians, does it matter what color they are? And I will say that's the last comment that I'll bring up from all the things that people have said, because there was a lot. So I'm just trying to like collate all the major points. But interestingly, in this COVID era with everything that's happening, I think a lot of people are probably going, hey, just give me a good clinician, preferably one who's not positive for COVID, right? And I want to talk about the fact that it's possible that a lot of people are saying, I don't care what color people are in this pandemic. I don't care what color people are in this unfortunate circumstance. Can we just get good clinicians? So I guess the first thing I'll bring up to you guys, now that I've sort of recapped a lot of those things, is do we want diversity, or do we want people who are educated on how to treat a diverse population? So let's start with that general question, because that seemed to be something that triggered a lot of people when people said, who cares about diversity if you have a great clinician, especially with everything that's going on right now? Now I can wear pajamas because...
Can you ask the question again, like just the last part?
Sure. The question is, do we want diversity? Meaning, do we need SLPs to be diverse in their racial, ethnic background, etc.? Or do we just need people who are educated on how to treat a diverse population? Meaning, it doesn't matter what the demographics are of our field. It only matters that whatever the demographics, these individuals have the capacity to show range, to show their diversity in thought, in the approach to treating people who might not espouse the same values that they have.
I can go first, since Zoom makes it hard to decide who goes first and what's happening. But I think we need both. I don't think it's one or the other. I think we can do both. I think everybody needs, and I said this I think last time, just because I'm brown, it doesn't mean I'm not racist. Like, I have my own version of racism that, or implicit bias that I've grown up with and am exposed to. And so I know I need to do the work to make myself more open to diversity in different ways. But it doesn't preclude having people who have different identities and have different ways of viewing the world, because I think that there's also, it's not just for patient care, right? It's also for the growth of our field. If everyone has the same identity, the same background, the same story, similar stories, I guess no two people have the same story, then you don't have a variety of viewpoints. So one of the things I was thinking about from last time is, a lot of the change in terms of African American English, or it being considered a dialect, or the influence of Spanish on English as not a disorder, came after we started having people in the field who spoke African American English, or who were bilingual in more than one language. Because 10, 20 years ago, we said if a kid had hearing loss, if a kid had autism, don't expose them to two languages, only expose them to one language. But as we had more and more SLPs that were bilingual, who were saying, let me look at this research a little bit more, let's look at the data, we're like, no, actually, it doesn't matter. You should be exposing them to both languages. Culture is important, things like that. So I think that our field grows from having varieties of opinions, and I don't think that the two of them are mutually exclusive at all.
So if I understand what you're saying, if I can just get clarification, you're saying that to an extent, you need enough people who aren't from the majority, so that when they hear the rhetoric or the concepts they're pushing in class, they can raise their hand and say, actually, I have a different experience and I can inform others. But without that, then you don't have that difference of opinion to even train other people with.
Right. I think, yes. And I think that and at the same time, everybody needs to also recognize their own stories, or what they're telling themselves, or their implicit biases, or their racist or sexist or classist, whatever they're carrying, and come to diversity from a different place. But I don't think that, so I think both are important.
What a great example. I just, that really struck me. Usually it takes an hour into the episode to really
Okay, I'll leave now.
But so I was struggling thinking well, what does that look like? What's an example? And I'm trying to think, and I think that those two examples of in the language domain is just really striking. I wouldn't have thought of that. And I think that that's a really good point. And it makes me think about dysphagia in particular, that we're dealing with predominantly, obviously, people's eating experiences. And I think that I'm like reflecting on this in the moment, that there are so many assumptions that you make about people's food experience, social experience, how they interact with food, that's just based on your own experience. And I can just think back right now on so many times that I've probably educated a patient based on what I think that they would want because of my own experience. And, it's probably, it's altruistic, like saying, well, this is obviously something that's important. It's important to me. How could it not be important to everybody? But I think food in particular, there's so many differences among us culturally that we have no idea about. And I think that if we don't have diversity in the field, we will continue to not have any idea about what does it mean to increase someone's quality of life in regards to eating and drinking if we don't have any idea what that looks like.
Mm-hmm. So I agree with what Anu was saying. I think you need both. One is not better than the other, though, because you can have someone who's not diverse as far as their living situation, how they grew up, but they put a lot of effort to make sure that they have the capacity to understand and empathize with other cultures. You can have someone who is diverse, and as you said, Anu, could be extremely racist, like could have so many implicit bias and microaggressions that are just hidden and haven't come out yet. So I don't think there's one over the other. You definitely need both.
Right. So
just going to say, I guess that's so I feel like I need to make a distinction, because I think this is where I go back and forth, is when you talk about implicit bias, to me, it's that you're biased and you don't know it, right? And that's very different than...
Not necessarily. Implicit bias doesn't necessarily mean you don't know it. Implicit bias suggests that in the moment that you're manifesting it, it was so fast that you might not have had the chance to correct it. So it's sort of like a little closer to maybe confirmation bias or categorization, right? So there's
how would you distinguish that then from, like, I may have a bias that I'm not even aware of, right? Like an example I gave where, like, I grew up in a obviously predominantly white background. We had a very typical, experience when it came to meal times, language, whatever it is. And I transfer that to somebody else because I just think that that's what their experience would be too, and being completely unaware of what the differences may be. Mm-hmm. I was thinking more of, there are certain cultural nuances that you may not be aware of because you've just never been exposed to it.
Right.
So maybe it's not bias, right? It's not bias.
Implicit bias test, it happens when they do implicit bias test. You have to answer within a certain period of time when you get the question. You can't wait and think about it. You have to go boom, 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 boom. And Black people take these tests, and they're biased against Black people too when they take these tests. So if they have a question about what's good and what's bad, or what's right and what's wrong, even Black people will often select which one is good. They'll pick the white person, and which one's bad, they'll pick the Black person. That's because they have to do it like this. If they had to stop and think like, whoa, the black is the berry, the sweet of the juice, I should not say that about myself. And then they will not pick the Black person as the bad one. So that's the thing about implicit bias. You don't get a chance to unthink what's been programmed into your head. It's immediate.
Interesting. So can I tell a story just to liven this up a little bit of like what I'm thinking of? Because it reminds me of a story you told me, Ianessa, which is like, because I'm thinking of more of, when you have a lot of diversity, you learn from each other, and you learn about how different cultural experiences are so different. And I'll never forget the time that, so where I'm from, if it's just like, this is what is norm, is like when you have a social gathering and you see, especially as a woman, I mean, it's very like gender, whatever, that's a whole different topic. But as a woman, like when you are serving meals and hosting, if you see, as soon as a man grabs a plate, and it's empty, you grab that plate for him and say, and you like fix a plate for him.
Yeah. Plate fixing. I remember.
When you were like, you never fix another man's plate.
Oh,
Like
no.
that, I was like, what? Like, I had never heard of this. You were like, this is a hard no.
If you're at a mixed party and there's some guy who's with another woman and you grab his plate, talking about you want some collards, whoa, are you trying to step in? Like, what is this? Why are you fixing my man's plate? You don't just go get to plate fixing with random other men who belong to people, or you don't know who he belongs to. You better watch it. Just watch out.
I mean, it's a silly example, and I'm just trying to insert a little bit of humor into a sensitive topic, but there are a million examples of things that you just don't know, right? Until you can experience other people's situations and stories and their culture and things that are you just don't know about. And I think when you have a lack of diversity, you just are so unaware of a world that's outside of your own. You think everybody lives in your own world, and that why would there be anything different?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. If you could hire a clinician, would you rather hire a clinician who is diverse, define however you want diversity in that sense, or no, I'm going to give it to you. Would you rather hire a Black clinician from an urban area, or a white clinic, but you don't know anything about their background, like other than they came from an urban area, or a white clinician from a rural area, but you at least know there's a capacity or a desire to want to learn more about diverse cultures?
And let me ask you a question. Is the setting in an urban area?
That's what I was going to say.
Because when you say they want the capacity to learn, it suggests that they don't already know about the setting.
Let's say it's like an Iowa area, Midwestern white student coming to DC, wanting to work in.
So your setting is an urban area, and you have a Black person who's already familiar with that environment. They were born and raised there, versus a white person who is rural, and you somehow they have a capacity or they have a yearning to learn. That's your question. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Guys, what do you think?
And assuming that knowledge is the same, like all those all the things. Like,
the only difference between the two is the cultural, your suspected cultural difference, right?
Yep.
So are we making an assumption that the person that lived there, the benefit to them is that they just know how things roll, right? Like they've lived there, they know how things go, but we don't know whether or not they have a desire. I guess that doesn't matter, right? Because they know this is where they grew up. I don't know how to answer that, to be honest with you.
I know where you're going with this, though. I know where she's going with this. Anu, do you have a thought?
I think my thought is. I think my thought. It's not implicit bias. I'm thinking this through. I say this for almost everything. I think it depends. I think it depends on who your colleagues are. I think it depends on your caseload. I think if there's no other white Black person in that agency, then I would choose the Black person, so that there is some change in the agency. I think I think it doesn't depend just on the clinicians. I think it depends on where you're working, who you're working with. I think there's a bigger picture to it. And I think who is your caseload? Is it young people, older people? Is it people with TBI? I think it matters so much what you're working on. My answer is it depends. I love that answer.
Why would the caseload matter?
So I think if it's, so when I did early intervention, for example, I was in people's homes, and there were some people, I was in McMansions and I was in the projects in Lowell. So I think if I'm going to go into people's homes, I want to know who the people whose homes I'm going into. Am I going mostly into the white rich part of DC, or am I going into the more projects part of DC? Am I going, so like if I'm going into there were roaches on the floor, there was fish in the sink, there's so many stories. And
There's fish in the sink.
Yeah, I went to the bathroom once, and the sink in the bathroom had fish, like
Catfish?
dead fish, like cooking fish in there. I was like, oh, no, I will not use your bathroom ever again. Sorry. But so I think it also depends if it's. There were some houses though that were happy McMansions, little nice houses, and so not even nice, very much more than nice. So if it's that, then it's different. So I think that the population matters. I think if it's a very, very if it's more the older geriatric population and they're mostly white, they may not feel as comfortable with the Black person. And so are we putting someone else in a spot that they're not going to be comfortable in?
Can I ask a question? Or Jess, did you want to expand on that? You're cool. Did you want to expand on that?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, so this totally brings me to this next point, which is it okay for somebody who is from an urban area, like Jess described in the last podcast, who's from Brooklyn or something like that, right?
Yep, Brooklyn.
And they, remember how you said, they're like, who this girl is, like coming up in here acting like so-and-so, she don't know anything about who we are, whatever. Is it okay for them to say that, but not okay for the rural white person to say, who is this brown person who doesn't know anything about who we are and what we do? That is the question I'm asking, because when you mentioned, and I know that's where you're going, Jess, when you mentioned this idea that an older white person might not be comfortable, I can immediately hear people say, who cares about if they're comfortable? We are here and they need to get used to us. And they had the priority for all these years and now we're here. But I don't hear that on the other end. I don't hear people saying this older Black man in Brooklyn needs to just get used to Becky from, the rural area. They just need to deal with her. In fact, that person's probably more likely to get what they want than the white person, perhaps because they're afraid to ask. But I will be honest. If I was in Maine,
I was just gonna let me give you my example, because I have to switch this in my head.
Go.
In Maine, where I'm from, if my choice was between Ianessa and Becca,
no.
You know what I mean? It's like I have to translate it in that way. Then I think about the problem very differently. Because the example you gave, Jess, I'm kind of like, I don't really have like a context, or like I can't picture what this looks like. I'm just basing it on like very generic like examples, but I have to think of it in a real life situation. So I'm from the east bumfuck of Maine, middle of nowhere, just middle of nowhere. It is like 1994 there right now. It's just different.
That's the future is happening.
I grew up in a town of like 20 people. Like it's in the middle of nowhere. It's a different life. And so when I translate that example to, would I choose Ianessa or would I choose somebody?
Please don't choose me, Leash.
Like Becca, you know what I mean?
Choose me. Do I get a choice in this? What if I don't want to go?
Becca would thrive where I'm from. Becca is a speech pathologist that we used to work with. She's just like she
likes the woods. She likes the fish. She's like a white. She's like a white, amazing, superhuman, like nice person. And I think that she'd walk in and just totally jive with them.
Kill it.
But can I also say, for all these years, how many Black older men or women have the choice? Like how many times have they just had the white person provide therapy because there is no choice? And so finally at this point, maybe we're not, because it's SLP so white, but maybe there is a choice where it's not the white person. And so why isn't that an option when all these years there hasn't been a choice for most people of color or any different identity, not just color, to have someone that's like them. I'm working with a student right now on like a thesis that they're doing, and the thesis that they're doing is focused, and there's a lot of research apparently in the transgender community about this. Would you choose, and I think in psychotherapy about this, but how much would you give up effective therapy for a therapist of the same identity as you?
Me?
So, like two people who are receiving therapy. It's been done in psychotherapy, which is, if you have 80% effectiveness of therapy but a 20% effective person who's the same, whose identity matches with you, would you rather that? And at what point, if it's 80 versus 30, if it's 80 versus 50, at what point then does the identity match matter more than the effectiveness of therapy? And with psychotherapy, I don't have the exact results in the data off the top of my head, but they have some data about where that switch happens for psychotherapy.
To the extent that that identification impacts therapy. The second that the identification does not impact therapy, then I don't care what color you are, if that makes sense.
But it does impact therapy if you believe that if you agree with the fact that about 30% of therapy progress happens because of the clinician-client alliance and not because of the actual technique. So if you...
Sure. No, what I'm saying is they hold a certain weight, but there's a point where you start to have this divide where now we just connect and you actually don't know what you're talking about. And then it becomes the point where you're like, oh, if we can keep here or here, it's fine. But when they start to cross and now there are different situations, I think most people wouldn't say, I'd like to never walk again because a Black person helped me. Like, if that's the situation, most people are like, no, I want to walk. I don't care what you look like, help me to walk. But I agree, Anu, that there are some things that speech pathologists work on where that is so much more relevant than others. Yeah. I think obviously if we're talking about, your example was in, did you say gender fluid?
Transgender.
Right, so you said transgender and voice. Obviously, their ability to interact and be okay with the progress might really depend on their comfort with you, just like getting a counselor who you feel understands. Like if I had a marriage counselor who hated marriage and was single, I'd be like, oof, maybe no, right? Like, what are you going to say to me? But versus one who's just like, no, I mean, that's not an issue, then maybe I wouldn't choose, maybe I'd choose a different counselor, because with counseling, you're saying personal things to that person that are very sensitive. So I would assume that you care that they espouse some common value that you hold. But
this is not even value, this is identity. And so in in psychotherapy, I think there have been some studies that have found that people will trade effectiveness of therapy for someone who matches their identity. So I will trade effectiveness if my therapist is Black. Mm-hmm. If I'm Black, then I'm willing to take a slightly less progress in therapy if I get it from a Black therapist. Or if I'm a transgender person, I'm willing to have my psychotherapy be slightly less effective if my therapist is also the same identity matches me. And I think the amount of where that threshold is different for different people, but there is some.
But Anu, you said something related to the main point, which is, you said something like, should that older Black person not be able to get what they want? And I don't think anyone should not be able to get what they want. But to be fair, our field is 95% female. So the likelihood that I'm going to show up in T27, which is the name of your town, Leash, Township 27 in Maine, is pretty low. I mean, I would be the person. I would be, who's the Black person in town, much less the Black speech pathologist, right? So, I don't think that's as much of an issue. I agree with you. It's not hard. It's pretty hard for a white patient to only get a pure lineup of people who aren't white as speech pathologists. It really is the reverse that's the issue, right? If our field is 95% white female, then you're pretty hard pressed to never ever come across a white SLP.
I think where we're struggling in this conversation, not that we're struggling, but I think where the gray area is in this conversation is, as speech pathologists, we are caught between philosophies of the pure medical side, whereas like take surgeons, for example. I think it's probably more common, I would guess, that somebody would care less about the race of somebody performing surgery. In that situation, you're like, I want the best person. I don't give a shit about your race. I just want.
I think women struggle with that. Women surgeons. I bet you they're people. Mm-hmm. I want the best, and it's not you because you have a vagina.
Sure.
But even there, I think there's implicit bias. I had a friend years ago tell me, when I hear someone talking with a Southern accent, I'm not sure how much I should trust them. But when I hear someone speaking with an Indian accent, I like my doctors to have an Indian accent because I know that they're smart.
Sure. But it's if they know,
or surgeons.
If there's something objective to say, this is the best person, the number one person for this surgery, I think somebody is going to let go of a lot of biases and say, okay. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we're therapists, right? So we have the medical end, but we're also therapists. And I think that in that zone, at the end of the day, people just want to feel seen, you know? And I think that there's a huge therapy aspect to what we do. We're not one or the other. We're somewhere in the middle. So it gets confusing. It's like, well, on one end, we diagnose physiology and we're recommending treatments, and then we want to be the surgeons, right? We're like, this is just anatomy. But on the other hand, we have to sit down with patients and talk about their experiences, and patients just want you to feel where they're coming from. And I feel that way too. I mean, I can't imagine if we're going just the therapist route. If I had a therapist that did not understand my background whatsoever, that I came from a small town, like things were just different there. Like there are just certain things that, like, if I walked in and somebody was like, I'm from Maine, I grew up in a small town, and that was my therapist, I'd be like, you get it. Like, you already know. I don't even have to tell you stories right now. You already get so much about my life that you're going to complete my sentences before I start them. Because it's just that there's just a base of a background there. So I think as in speech pathology, we teeter between the two. And I think that therapist part about patients wanting to be seen, we cannot discredit that. And we have to acknowledge that. And I think if our field was more diverse, I just feel like we would be able to meet patients in that realm so much better.
More capacity to do it. And I think you meant patients want to be heard. I think you said therapists want to be heard.
Oh, sorry. Patients want to be heard. They want to be seen. They want you to get their experience. They want you to get what their goals are and why those are their goals, not just nodding your head saying, okay, that's not okay. We can write that down. They want you to get it. And, you know, to be honest, there was a lot of people that, based on my background and being white, that I'm not going to be able to understand that as well as somebody else could. And it's just the reality.
Okay, I have a question that I would like to transition to academia. But I would also argue, Anu, based on your comment, I think, I don't know if it's true, I think that African Americans or Black people, whatever, in the United States are expected to be bicultural in a way that white people are not. One, in the same way that a woman who's taking a job, let's say there's a woman who wants to be a policeman, a policewoman, a police person, I don't know. And let's say there's a woman who wants to be a firefighter. She has to, she's already a woman, so she gets women culture, but she has to understand how men function in order to do her job. And I think that the more you move up in academia as a brown person, I don't know about Indian, I don't know, you can tell me more about Asians, etc. But as a Black person in the United States, where the stereotype is that we are probably poorly educated and probably not as smart and probably more poorly prepared, that we are constantly trying to prove ourselves. And I would argue that perhaps white people don't spend as much time trying to prove themselves. And perhaps based on stereotypes, Asians are probably trying to do it even less. Let's say that's true. Given that situation, I have to be able to function in a white world because the world is white where I want to go. So my capacity to accept at this point in my life, a white male who comes in and who is an ENT and is going to scope me, I expect it. I'm actually shocked if a brother comes in like, oh, snap, let me find out. What's going on, bro? Right? I'm surprised because that's all I've ever seen. In fact, every ENT I know is basically white for the most part that I know of. So I'm not even shocked by that. And that's because I've been exposed to that. The reverse is more of a surprise for people like, oh, Leash, how many times have you prepped a study participant for the many studies we've done? And I walk in and they're waiting for Dr. Humbert. And I walk in, they're like, they just keep looking like, that's not her, that's not her, that's not her. Finally you go, she's the PI, she's the swallowing expert, she's our boss. She's
Yeah.
paying for everything. They go,
And honchos come in. That's what we always say. And then they walk in like, well, okay.
and how many times?
And you can get like, it's so, they're like, good for you.
Yeah, thank you for doing that for your people. And
So
they don't say anything, but a lot of times I've been asked, are you Dr. Humbert's assistant? And I'd like to think that that's because I look young, but it's really also because I look so black.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if we stop now and start getting overly sensitive and upset that this happened, we're just done. We can't get overly sensitive now. We have to keep going. And my worry is that there have been so many infractions on these students being told to go to other fields, just the constant, as they say, microaggressions, that they leave. So that's why I want to transition to academia, because I'm concerned that the pipeline argument that people bring up, we're never going to get there if it's true that some people have a different capacity to deal with these constant death by 1,000 cuts, where they're constantly being questioned, oh, you're the one, and everybody has a different capacity to manage it. And maybe these students aren't making it because they're expected that they're not really good enough to be in the program. And then as a result, they end up dropping out. What do you guys think about that?
So I'm going to go ahead. I think that is actually where clinicians of color could come in to play, to provide specific mentorship, to be a face, to say, look where I'm at. This is not impossible, especially, Ianessa, for you to say, look what you've done within our field as a Black woman. That's not to say that we're trying to bring more women of color, but it is to say, if you're interested in this specialty, it is possible for you to reach not only my height, but then exceed where I've reached. So that's where I think it can come in hand. But there's nothing we can actually, when I think of myself, there's nothing I can do about how you view yourself when you're in that classroom. People are coming in already thinking, I'm not good enough. I can't do anything for you if you don't think you belong. I can only work with the student that believes I deserve this seat. I filled out my application. I wrote a damn good, personal statement, and this seat is mine. If you come with that mentality, now I can work with you. But we end up with a lot of students of color who already think they only picked me because I'm Black. So, if that's the reason you got in is because you're Black, shout out to you, because you got 29 students who are white and they don't get noticed. So if you're getting noticed because you're Black, capitalize on that in the classroom instead of looking at it as though, oh my God, damn, I'm the only one. I look at it as an opportunity.
So you're talking about imposter syndrome, but there's something called stereotype threat, which has been studied fairly well. And I'll give you the example. The idea is that whatever the stereotype is that society has about you, it can either bolster you or it can suppress you. An example is one study, don't ask me the reference now, where they tested Asian females in math. In one group, they made them fill out demographics before doing the math test, where they had to say, I'm Asian or any other ethnicity. In another group, they only had to say whether they were male or female. In the group where they had to say if they're male or female, they did significantly worse than the group where they had to say their ethnicity. The group that had to say ethnicity had Asian stereotypes, which is good at math, on their side. The group that had to say women had women stereotypes that were bad with math, not on their side. And it impacted their capacity to perform. Does it mean that stereotype threat is going to everybody? Absolutely not. But again, if you do have any level of imposter syndrome, stereotype threat can go to your detriment. And there have been people who have been directly told you're not good enough. Now, does it mean they said you're Black, therefore you're not good enough? No, but I would suggest that if you have even 10% imposter syndrome, you have stereotype threat against you, you don't feel like there's somebody who you can just say, hey, look, there's a Black faculty member or somebody who's like, this is happening. Am I crazy? When she tried to touch my hair, am I wrong? Like, is that a problem? So some people are like, am I being overly sensitive, or is some shit really happening here? Like, are people really trying to pull me down? And they want to know what's real. And sometimes that can get in people's heads and really mess them up. So while I tend not to be the person with imposter syndrome, unfortunately, my problem is I'm confident to a level of ridiculousness sometimes. But on the other hand, I totally understand what it means for somebody to be uncertain about where their place is, because that's actually a really common human thing to experience. I mean, you're nodding you're really nodding over there. Are you on my side?
I'm all on your side. I think it's true. I think having someone to normalize that feeling is really important. If you had someone, like you said, like another clinician or someone or a supervisor or someone you could go talk to and say, how did you get through this? I think that gives people the strength of being like, okay, I can get through it too. This will happen, but it's a year and a half, whatever, I'll get out of it. The other thing I think is that academia too is very wide, just like the rest of the field. And so, as you said, most people who are of a different culture have to be bicultural, bilingual, and so by stylistic, whatever, and your professional attitude, your professional attire is all determined by white Midwestern culture. And so you have to change your clothes, you have to change how you present, you have to change how you, or not, but in order to show up in clinic every day. And if you don't have anyone in supervision, in supervisory roles that gets it, that is willing to look at it in a different way, or is willing to say, okay, so let's talk about this. Like, this is the code switch that you have to do here for your client's sake. This is the way you have to code switch, versus being like, I just don't like it when you do this. Like, that just seems unprofessional to me. Well, too bad. This is not. So I think that is really important, that we have role models who are of a variety of different cultures and identities, so that people know that it can happen, and that these role models are accessible to students, because otherwise it's lonely as the only one in a classroom to always feel like you're different, to always feel like, was it me? Was that a microaggression? Was that not a microaggression? Am I imagining stuff? Like, I've had those happen multiple times where I'm like, is that my imagination? Did they say something? I'm really not sure what to make of this. And if you have no one to talk to, it's in your head a lot.
So let me
I think where I just want to say, I think where I'm different is, it's been people of color that have been the biggest bullies in my life. So it's hard for me to, I don't know how to explain it. When you think about that one person saying you're never going to make it, it was a Black male professor saying you're not good enough. And so
I know what you're talking about, because the person you told
represent.
Say again.
Hmm?
Is that because they're hard on you because they want you to represent? Like, what? Explain that to me.
So I love this conversation right now, because
I have 4 questions that I don't understand. I need to ask on behalf of the white person.
It's cool.
I swear to God, I'm like,
you have a question. Wait, you have a question you need to ask on behalf of white people?
I have 4 questions.
The white delegation, Dave Chappelle.
Okay. I think this is happening.
Wait, is there a guitar playing that you're going to sway to?
So wait, first I'm going to start with Jess. I'm going to go back. Jess, when you said that people of color are harder on you, why do you think that is?
I've never gotten an answer. I just ball up into the fetal position and cry like a baby.
Wait, can I help? Jess?
Yes, please.
I can guess, but I obviously have no.
I would like to hear your guess, Leash.
My guess would be that if you're from an underrepresented group of people and you're going out and being successful, people are going to be hard on you because the stakes are high. They want you to represent the group really well.
Okay,
right.
So let me speak on that. That's great insight for my main squeeze over here, M-A-I-N-E.
Maine is being an idiot. I'm like, oh my God.
No, not idiot. It's very white. And that you had that insight, and I've never really told you about these things, considering how much we've talked about, is
right.
really quite good. So let me just say this. I have experienced that. When I went to Howard University, I was told that I was the first student who did a formal partnership with Howard University and the NIH to do my dissertation at the NIH. I was brought into an office of a very highly ranking individual far beyond our department, because I was going to be the person representing the whole university. And I was told, this is why I'm not saying names or offices, you should know that the people at the NIH are racist. And you need to make sure you understand that, because you're representing the whole university.
Yeah.
I felt like I was integrating the United States. Like, you know, that first little girl who was like integrating school.
Yeah.
Okay, at least we had a lunchbox. Can I get a lunchbox? Like, what is going on, right? So there is some of that, definitely, that is the case, which is we already know they're going to say, and sure enough, while I was there, at moments where things, you know, I did well, and I'm very proud of my time there. I have a good relationship with my mentor still, but there are times where, as if every PhD program, hey, this is a current, Jess is my current doctoral student, Alicia is my former doctoral student. Times get tough just because PhDs are hard. You need to know that your mentor believes in you sometimes, right, guys? And so there are moments where times get tough, just like every PhD program. And somebody, not my PhD mentor, a postdoc, leaned over to me and said, if you don't do well, she'll never take another Howard student. And I leaned over to him and said, you know, you wouldn't say that if I was from Harvard. Because no one's going to say, if you don't do well, they'll never take another Harvard student. I don't represent Harvard if I'm Black. I only represent Howard if I'm Black.
But don't you think that the racism is so deep that that's probably true? You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, but this person had a ignorance, but you're absolutely right, which is why they pulled me aside before I actually took this thing.
It's crazy that it was said, but it's crazy that it was true. Like,
yeah, of course.
It's crazy that it has to be said.
Yeah.
And that it was said, but it's crazy that it has to be
but
said.
A lot of people already know this. I mean, I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
They were being maternal in a good way.
How does that make you feel?
What?
Like, I'm curious how that makes you feel, because
Then or now?
then. Because
then I kind of felt
like, I got this, like, roll up your sleeves.
The thing that got me is that I had already interviewed there, and I had to impress them with conversation, with free-ranging conversation. And I will not forget that when I left Christy Ludlow's office, who was my dissertation advisor, we had an amazing conversation about science, and I learned so much, and we talked way longer than we needed to because I was just so enthralled with everything. And I was on my way out the door, and I said, and she had a Canadian flag there, and I said, oh, you're Canadian? And I said, I am too. She goes, you're in. And she already was going to accept me, but that was like that, boom, we have a cultural connection. It had nothing to do with her color or my color. She was like, that's it, you're in. She said, you already asked really amazing questions. You followed this conversation, but that Canadian connection made it. And then later I'm hearing they're all racist. My thing is that I already believed who she was based on what I learned from her in all the interactions I heard. So for me, it was a little like, guys, I get it. I'm not saying no individual can have a tiny bit of racism, but I just need to have this moment where I believe that this person who has accepted me to their lab, who believes in me, who will make a huge impact on my life, I just want to believe everything I've already heard. I don't want to hear that extra stuff right now. So it was kind of bittersweet.
Yeah.
All right. So for me, hearing it from a Black male who, this was in my undergrad, my experience is I'm not surprised if a white person doesn't think I'll make it. That's not to say that I think all white people don't think I'll make it, but I'm not surprised if you don't think. But I'm like, damn, yo, you as a Black person, you see me out here trying to do something, and at that time as an undergrad, it's like, why would forget about color. Why are you trying to diminish a student who has a dream? Knowing how powerful your words are, why would you do that? You have a choice to make. You could say nothing. You could say something positive, or you could tear someone down, and you chose to say some fucked up shit. So for me, I'm just like, damn, there was no need to do that, especially as a Black person. If a white person does it, it's like, I feel like I'm more prepared for a white person to tell me some shit than a Black person to be like, how you gonna do that? And it's like, what you got?
What the best you got? Like,
yeah, it's like, come on, it's nothing. But here's what I will say. Ianessa, I want to say this.
Yeah, go for it.
With my years of working for you, race has never been.
You work with me.
Did I say for? I apologize.
Alicia's like, bullshit, nobody works with
so,
you.
Someone softened up in the past.
No, she has. I see it, yo. Race has never been a topic when it comes to our work. It's been science. Race is like the weird thing that gets brought up. Like, what does that have to do with this? That's not to say we talk about the patient, we talk about background, we talk about experience, we talk about the science, but that part of like, remember, girl, you're a Black woman and it's important. No!
Who cares? I'm not going to work for that.
The white person has to interject. I have a question. When you said that race has never been a thing, in my head, I'm like, well, yeah, like why the fuck?
Yes or me?
Jess just said, she was like, great, in our relationship, in our mentorship relationship, race has never been an issue. And when you first said that, I go, well, obviously you're like, right? So why would this be an issue? And then I guess it was at the end you said, because did you expect that Ianessa would be rallying you because you're Black, or holding you to a different standard because you're Black, or like, what did you mean by that? I guess, like,
so in my experience with people of color in higher education, it comes out. It slides out. Okay. It always comes out like, well, remember, you know, if you catch them off guard, they slide it out.
Remember, and you're Black and they're going to think this about you.
Yeah, like I don't know how to explain it, but if you catch a person of color off guard, they let their guard down and they bring up the race thing, has been my experience. And it just never comes up.
That's been my experience as well.
I feel like you're all on the same page. It's just like, but you know, because like you're Black, it's got to be different. Like you got to do X, Y, Z. Like so, that there's an assumed like commonality that everyone just understands. And if you're like, what are you talking about? Like,
okay, here's one thing. Don't invite me to the party if it's going to be a group of people of color talking about the non-people of color. I'm not the person to invite to the party. I'm not down with that party.
What are you gonna say? Like, I have so many questions.
I already know.
So can I go back to your question, your thing about it's never been brought up? Is there a point in which it can be brought up in a way that's supportive and helpful? As like when I think of supervising students who are in some way supervising students clinically in academia, I always bring up culture, because obviously I'm from a different culture. And so I always bring it up, and I always bring it up also, especially with Indian Indian students who come from India, because they have to learn a new culture very quickly. And they have to learn that new culture and be able to apply it to clients like that. And so to me, I thought it was helpful to have those conversations and say, so here's what you're gonna like be held up to.
But Anu, I think what Jess is saying is that it might not be encouraging to hear it from every person. I think if you're coming straight from India, the likelihood that there are far more similarities between you and somebody coming straight from India perhaps might be more likely than that Jess and I might have them. So I think 100% yes, it can be helpful.
Okay, that was my question. I was like, have I been doing this all wrong? Should I quit?
No. I think there can be situations where
definitely.
But I do think that there's situations where it's this constant rhetoric where like, you know, all white people are 2 drinks from the N-word, which is what somebody told me. I was like, what? I've had so many drinks with my friends and they didn't say it. Is it because they had a drink and a half? Like, what happened? I don't want to hear that because like I said, when I went to the NIH, I already believed in Christy. She was amazing to me. I don't need to hear you tell me that at some point she's going to be thinking I'm the N-word when I mess up. Like, I don't want to hear that because that may have been your experience. And I think that's when it goes to the level of detriment.
Right.
I'm really curious because this is so fascinating to me that it never even crossed my mind that my current doctoral student happens to be Black. One of my past doctoral students happens to be white. And she's saying at no point did race ever come up like as a thing, hey, you know, we got to talk about this. I assume that there was never a point with us, you and me, Alicia, that I ever had to be like, you know, as a white person, like you never wanted to hear from me representing, like we just joked about it, I assume.
Well, yeah, and it's funny because it's like, so it's interesting. Jess, I think your experience is really unique in that. And I don't think I've ever really heard that perspective that you get it more from within than without, you know, on the outside, because I've never said to somebody like, I have a Black PhD mentor, and you know what? Race has never come up before. You know what I mean? But in the stereotype, you assume that that's a conversation that we would have had more, right?
But it's also because in swallowing, is there another Black person? Like if you say a Black PhD mentor, they're like, yeah, it's a Humbert. It's like they're gonna know.
Yeah, that's true.
It's almost not necessary to say unless they're out of the field.
Yeah.
Well, I would say my first, I want to also mention that working with you, Ianessa, expanded what I thought was possible for a person of color within the field of dysphagia. So I think initially it was, well, since you're a person of color, you must tackle these topics within dysphagia. And then I deal with you and you're like, yeah, that's cool, but this is more important. Like the general, there's no need to talk about diet modification so much because we're not even clear on how we diagnose. And so working with you helped me pull out, instead of pigeonholing myself into, well, because I'm a person of color, I must focus on this small little area. There's a bigger problem at hand. And I think that also impacts people of color, where we say, I am not, first of all, I want to say that I am not identifying anyone particular. But when someone of color says, well, I must talk about AAE, or I must talk about the Black student, you can, but also know that before AAE, there's general language that can also be addressed, and you get to be a part of that community as well. You don't have to specifically address AAE because you're Black. Same thing being because you're white doesn't mean you don't have access to research on AAE.
And AAE stands for African American English. And
I first heard of AAE when I was 22 years old and was in grad school.
Probably me too.
Me
too.
If you ever saw MTV Raps or whatever it's called, you had heard it. Sure. Because that's what it's called.
Talking it, who knows?
Alicia was twerking. She knows.
Alicia in like junior high with a hat to the side, like TLC, with her like baggy pants.
I was the token Black kid in school. I had all of Jay-Z's Hard Knocks album, Volume 2.
Use AAE.
I'm not.
Okay. Wait, I have another question for you guys. Because I feel like predominantly white people are going to listen to this.
Huh?
Raise your hand, guys.
No.
Go for it.
No, I was just going to say, I have two more questions.
Interrupt. What can we do? Okay, go.
Interrupt. I have four more questions.
Ask your questions. They're more important than 90s rap. Go.
Oh, okay. What I was going to say is that, because I feel like obviously.
I don't know if it's more important, actually.
Quiet, Ianessa.
So, Jeff, when this happens, this is what you do. You just sit back and you do this. Finish. Okay. So, just statistically, predominantly the people that listen to this podcast are going to be white. So, I have a couple of questions based on that, on a couple of things that you guys said. So one,
white people.
Anu, when you talked about code switching, it really, really struck me. And I was curious for you guys to comment on when first of all, are most of you, do you work in a predominantly white setting? Like your colleagues are white, you work with patients that are white. Is that true for all of you? I'm assuming Iowa. It's gotta be.
It doesn't matter. When I was at Hopkins with you, Alicia, I was the only Black person on faculty.
Yes, no, I just want to clarify that with people that don't know the backgrounds or whatever.
University of Florida, I was the only Black person on faculty.
Sure.
However, at New York, it was extremely diverse. It was, I would say, equal as far as Latino, Latina, African American, white. It was, Asian. It was extremely diverse. And every level, middle management, higher management, clinician, it didn't matter. Everyone was of different races and cultures.
So I would imagine that the answer to this question would vary throughout the course of your careers. And I want you to answer this based on when it was like the most, like the worst, I guess. You had mentioned kind of code switching for white culture and like having to dress a certain way. And that just really struck me. I hadn't really thought about that before. And I'm curious if you could give a little bit of insight into what that code switching is like on a daily basis. Is it something that's on the back of your mind in little ways all day, in little situations? Are you constantly, is it one of those like little micro engines in your brain that's you're constantly having to compensate and code switch and adapt to your environment? Because as a white person, I can tell you that's not something I think about at all. Mm-hmm. And it's something I couldn't have understood or appreciated until you said it. And I'm just curious on that experience, because I find that people would be really surprised by that.
Go on, Anu.
I make a joke about it now, but I remember my first pro-sem when I was in Illinois, and I said what you all call developmental. In India was development, and I kept saying development, development, development the entire presentation. And at the end, someone came up to me and said, "What was that word you kept saying?" And I was like, well, development, like what's your problem? And they were like, no, we say development. I was like, oh, okay. And so I think that is, so those, like, for me, it's stress patterns. So words like developmental, I have to think about it for a second before I say it. I've been talking to the students about, I'm going to think this through for a second. This kindergarten screening, I think it's called, it's BIDELS, and I'm always, like, it takes me a second to say it, biddles. The A word for teenager, adolescent.
Oh, sorry.
That too. I never use it. I always say teenager, because I always have to take a few seconds to figure out what the stress pattern is for that compared to the Indian stress pattern, which is where I learned it.
But what even, like, outside of language? Like, I'm thinking more about, like, less of what you're saying, but like how you dress, cultural norms. Like when you walk into a room, you go and get a cup of coffee, you sit down and you have small talk. Like, I just imagine that there's got to be so many little things where something goes off in your brain that goes, oh, okay, this is what white people do.
Well, I think it was there 20 years ago, and now it's just imbibed in me, right? So the choice of colors, the way I dress, and it has changed over time. When I first came to the US and I realized, like, oh, nobody's wearing these flowy things and like print on the top and print on the bottom, and that these are not, like, black and gray would be better for you here. I changed a little bit, and then I came back because I'm like, no, like, I really like color. I'm not giving it up. But I think I don't wear Indian clothes when I go, if I have a clinic day, if I have student meetings. If I have student meetings, sometimes I'll wear Indian clothes. I will not, I choose my wardrobe based on who I'm going to see that day. I will wear how I'm sitting, how I'm eating. In India, we eat with our hands. And if I'm home, I eat with my fingers, many meals. But when I'm in clinic, when I'm at work, I will never eat with my fingers. So I'm like, it's in lots of different ways. It's in when I meet people for the first time, like visit day, meet people for the first time. There's a part of me that thinks, will they not shake my hand because they think I'm Indian? And so Indian women don't shake hands. And so a lot of people are not sure what to do with me at that moment, like especially Midwestern white dads. They just don't know if they should shake my hand, they should not, because they've read that Indian women don't usually shake hands. And so they're not, so there's always that second of hesitancy with some people where they're not sure how to respond to me, especially since I sometimes have power in those meetings now. When I didn't, it was different, but when I do now, there's not a clear norm for what people do with that. So I think it's in every part of what I do, but the cognitive load on that now is 5%. Okay. 20 years ago it was probably 30-40%.
You know, and coming back to the question of why do we need diversity? You said, like, in India you normally eat with your hands. I'll never forget an occupational therapist, and I worked with a patient for 2 months who had really severe aphasia and couldn't communicate, but also had dysphagia as well. And we worked on, for 2 months, it was different dysphagia therapy. She was working on fine motor, so she was teaching him to eat with a fork. And he was from Ethiopia. And in Ethiopia, they don't eat with a fork, they eat with their hands. And we did this for 2 fucking months. And we had no idea. We had no idea. If we had anybody on our staff, if we had any diversity whatsoever on our staff, somebody probably would have said, yeah, they don't do that.
Yep. This is what's natural to them.
Ridiculous goal to have for 2 months with somebody, they eat with their hands. And it was just like, when you said, do we need diversity? Like, those are the examples I think of like, we're just doing things so wrong in so many ways because we don't have diversity.
The same way, like when I did early intervention, one of the scales of self-care is, can they feed themselves with utensils. And all my Indian families would never get that because nobody was feeding themselves with utensils. And they were like, can they do these things for self-care? And I'm like, no, culturally, the mom is supposed to do these things for a kid. Like a 2.5-year-old is not taking care of themselves. So their self-care scores were always low. But I'm like, but that's like, the moms were like, what am I here for if you're asking my child to take their plate to the sink themselves? Like, no, I'm feeding them.
So what do you guys
Alicia,
switching thing?
So I love the expansion of code switching outside of language. So a couple of things that I mentioned that I wrote down was, I didn't realize how much an all-white faculty influenced how I dressed. I didn't know that I dressed a particular way until Ianessa shows up in yoga pants and a jean jacket and a cap to go teach a class. And I'm like, what are you wearing? She's like, what? And it taught me then, like, oh, I don't have to look a particular way to go treat a patient. And I never realized that I was following a particular pattern of middle-aged white women.
Faculty at Howard?
No, this is from my master. I mean, even at Howard.
That's a ridiculous question, but
I would have never imagined wearing tights on campus in a clinic. And then here comes my mentor doing it. So she gave me permission. She expanded my bandwidth to be like, yo, let me pull up. I probably won't, but at least I know I can. That's one thing. I realized that when I enter, if I know that I'm entering the space of a Caribbean person, completely different demeanor. Oh my goodness.
Explain.
I walk in, shoulders down, relaxed, ready to talk back. I'm interrupting, my hands start flowing. I'm bringing up certain artists, or I'm bringing up food. I'm jumping ahead because I already know what your concern is, and I'm going to meet that before you even think of it. I'm going to bring up stuff you haven't even thought about yet because I know what your home looks like. So now that's probably like me at my truest form. If you bring me to a person of color and maybe they're like African American, it might take me a little bit of getting used to. Working in DC helped me, but I don't know all the nuances of just being African American. The other part where I'm really good at is you just being an immigrant. I'm talking about you don't speak no English. Oh, I'm pulling up. I'm ready, especially like I thought about, I had an Asian patient. He was sent home. I can't remember what the diet was, but I remember they said no rice. This is a Cantonese speaking old man. How are you going to tell him he can't have sticky rice? That don't make no sense. What is he supposed to eat every day? So it's just knowing certain things about cultures that doesn't make sense. Like your recommendation doesn't fit the patient. Exactly. And that's why you need to have people who are like, you know what, I'm willing to see. That's why for me, I don't care about you having color. Are you willing to see the patient? Forget everything you've learned. Can you see him? Can you see her? Are you willing to listen and ask the right questions? I think that's where people of color, clinicians of color, can help non-clinicians of color ask the right questions to get the answer to meet the need. But you don't have to all of a sudden fill in a whole bunch of people of color to say, well, we got a whole bunch of blacks in there. So we know, because I don't even know if they know what to ask. You have to be like, are you willing to see the subject? And that's most important. I'm done.
If I can answer this question really quickly, the first thing I will say is that I don't really do well with this question because I'm just me wherever I'm at, right?
But what are the consequences then that you have faced because of that?
My philosophy in life is always kill them with competence. They will overlook almost everything about you if you demonstrate that you're competent wherever you are. I already know when I walk in that they don't know how to handle me. But I am me, and I'm not changing that. I've never been the one to change that. I've had blonde afro. I'm talking about bleach blonde afro. I've been bald. I've had a bob, like a suburban mom bob down to here. Right now I have shaved sides and dreadlocks on the top. I decide what I'm going to wear. I decide I'm going to wear whatever the heck I'm going to wear. And I'm not compromising that because somebody thinks that somehow these clothes or this hair or these earrings means that I can't know about swallowing physiology. So because my philosophy is kill them with competence, I tend not to modulate as well as people want me to. So that's
don't you feel if that's your philosophy, you better damn make sure that your competence is.
Of course. But I almost never fail in that capacity. Sure. Here's the benefit that I'm willing to admit. I'm willing to admit that because I'm Canadian and people think I'm white on the phone. Say it again? I do. I'm telling you, I have a pass with white people that is so beyond understanding. If they hear me and they realize I'm Canadian, they're like, well, fuck, she's one of us, kind of thing. On the other hand, I then kind of lose that pass with African Americans, where I constantly have to be, I'm constantly told I'm not Black all the time by African Americans. I moved to this country in 1990, and since then, they have been telling me I'm not Black or I'm not Black enough. It doesn't bother me because I get to be me. I'm never quite white enough. I'm never quite Black enough, but I'm always 100% Ianessa enough. And because that's my standard, I always win. So that's my philosophy on that.
So let me ask you a question on that, though. So sometimes code switching comes not because you feel like you have to, but just because it's just the nature of the world. So like, for example, you have a really core group of girlfriends who are Black that live in DC, Edwina or something. You're always doing crazy shit. Yeah. So that group, now there's like 3 of you or 4 of you or whatever. If I hung out with you guys, would I be like, what the fuck?
No, 100%. First of all, you guys, I mean, the words that would
I feel like you're cool with me. Like you're like you with me 24/7. But if I hung out with you in that realm, I would probably be like, who is this person that I've known?
Yes, there is code switching in terms of how Ianessa am I going to be? Am I going to be Ianessa on 1, 3, 5, or 10? Right. Ianessa on 10 is barely tolerable by any other human being except for me. And I recognize that. Ianessa on 1 has never happened ever in life. I range between Ianessa on 5 and 8.5, and that's where people can handle me. Ianessa between 8.5 and 10 is like, it's craziness, right? I can be Ianessa between 8.5 and 10 with them, and I know that I won't have to sacrifice the friendship. But I think everybody's like that in terms of their friends, etc. But professional settings really want me at Ianessa on 1. I'm not doing that for you because that's the most. It's almost it's like I'm on a ventilator when I'm Ianessa on 1 for me.
And we're on sensitive times. We shouldn't be talking about ventilators. Okay.
What's your other white question, Leash?
Quick question. My other quick white question is, Jess, you had to make about. Let me consult my napkin.
White, you have to name this quick white question. Oh, this is great.
When you said it was amazing. Let me make quick white question.
You had made a comment about the idea of when, it's hard, some people have a lot of difficulty with themselves when they get accepted into a program or something and people make a comment about like, well, or they feel like I only got in because I'm Black, right? And that's hard. And it just, I guess I'll ask a more pointed question is that brings in the question of affirmative action. And is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it somewhere in between? Or what is your thoughts and feelings about that?
It makes me think about your living room, Ianessa.
Oh my God, we've had so many deep conversations about this. It has been crazy.
I've been forced to sit down in her living room and watch shit about affirmative action.
Forced? Really forced?
I feel forced because I'm like, can we just talk about my fucking research?
You know what's more important than your research? Your sense of self in the realm of academia is half your battle. It might be a third of Alicia's battle, but it's literally half of your battle. Because your capacity to feel like you belong can take you farther than Alicia really needs. Because when she shows up at DRS, her struggle is to stand out.
Yeah.
When you're at DRS, you don't have the privilege of being DRS means Dysphagia Research Society. You don't have the privilege of being inconspicuous anymore. And I talk about these things. And so that's why I might not be directly telling you, you need to do this, but I kind of want you to understand that these are issues. So go ahead.
You asked, do I think that affirmative action is necessary? Was that it?
I don't think I have a specific question. I just want to say affirmative action, discuss.
Oh, got it. Cool. I don't know. I feel like no matter what I say, I feel like whatever I say, someone's going to be upset with my answer. Here's just me talking my shit. It's cool. Look, if you're going to have it, that's fine. If you're going to have it, look, man, any student of color who's listening to this, take advantage of it. But it's not just to say that if you get in because you're Black, you better keep your seat because of more than just because you're Black. If they let you in because you're Black, shout out to you. And then prove to them why you deserve that seat. That's it. My thing is, I have no problem if you remember me because I was the Black person. I don't give a shit. Because guess what? Alicia, there's 29 of y'all. There's one of me. I don't care if you call me big lip, dreadlock, cool. Because it's
all true. We are together.
I'm cool with it. Because you're going to leave there remembering what I asked or what I said. And I'm going to stand out better, Alicia, than you will. That's just what's going to happen. So I want to encourage people of color to say, it's fine if they identify you by your color. Prove to them that you're more than your color.
But the other thing is, literally, here's the biggest cognitive dissonance that I don't understand. On one hand, Black people in Black communities are always trying to decide who's the Blackest. It's a thing, right? It's like, if you are too white, it's not a good thing. People aren't congratulating for you to be too white.
But don't be too Black.
Exactly. The Blacker you are culturally, the better. And then suddenly, when among white people, if they bring up those same issues, it's like, they try to say I was Black. It's like, you were just proving yourself last night over doggone friggin' St. Ives Alizé that you were the Blackest of the Black. And now this group says you're the Blackest of the Black. It's like, you ain't supposed to say that. Like, I don't understand. Are you or aren't you? That's getting it.
What is happening? You can bring your son back on, Alicia. That's fine.
I actually did that by accident. I have never done that before, and I didn't realize how easy it was.
So I grew up in India without affirmative action. I grew up off a person, off privilege.
Say the name. Affirmative action.
Affirmative, I don't know. Late people. I was with a friend years ago when I first moved, like 3 years after I moved to the US, and she was doing her MD, PhD, and she had to study for the MCAT. And so she was like, will you ask me questions? So I was like, yeah. And at 11 p.m., she was like, it's getting late. Your accent is getting stronger. My perception is getting worse. We're not communicating. Let's stop here. That's kind of where I'm feeling now. I'm going to go to my Indian accent more and more as it's getting later and later. And you're not going to be able to understand a lot of what I'm saying. But we'll try to get through this. So I think what Jess said, I think there is value in affirmative action. I think there's reasons for affirmative action. I think it's there. It should be there. I don't think it should be taken away. And I think the stereotype that people have of like, oh, you just gotten because you're Black, that's something that the world needs to change. I didn't, and maybe yes, and maybe not. And maybe you gotten because you were Latinx, or maybe not. Maybe you gotten because you were Native American, or maybe not. Whatever, you're here now. Let's get you to the point where you're competent.
It's like, I get a leg up because I'm white. I know that. I know that going into a job. I know that I have a certain level of understanding with somebody that's interviewing me if they're white, and I get a leg up. And when I get a job, I don't sit there and go, fuck, I probably got that job because I'm white.
Yo, Alicia, I know. I applied a job.
You guys should do the same. So I
Alicia,
think of like,
yo, I applied to jobs like, I'm Black. Y'all trying to fit a quota. What's up? Like, I'm gonna fill out a diversity statement. What's up? I'm gonna hit like 3 of your check marks. So for me, I'm like, I look at it like, yo, I'm gonna get the job before you. Cause I'm Black. And you have to prove that you're doing like this diversity thing. I hate to say it, but I think there is a positive to being a person of color if you're competent.
Get inside the door and then be competent as hell.
Well, it's the
That's
same
it.
thing with like at the NIH. Like I actually qualify as a minority, like the supplement, when you get a grant, you can have like a minority supplement. One is because of race and ethnicity, and the other is because of socioeconomic background. So like there's like 7 different qualifications. Like my mom was on WIC. Like we were, you know, basically we hit every category except being homeless. And I'm like, hell yeah, I'm taking advantage of that. I'm not going to get it because of that. My grant is going to have to be good.
Yeah.
But am I not going to take advantage of that? Hell no. Of course I am. Yeah, you need poor people in NIH. Like, yeah, no, but I think that it's just an interesting.
So what's your other white questions, Leash?
Running low, Ianessa.
I know. I wanted to make a comment, tell a funny story. When you guys were talking about always having to prove yourselves, right? Like in a different way, like you're held to a different standard, that you're always having to like go a little bit of the extra mile. And I had dinner with a friend of mine who's African American, and we went out to a Thai restaurant. And this is just a story to kind of hit home to like white people of like what this probably feels like, because it really, really affected me and really struck me in a kind of a silly way. But so we went out to a Thai restaurant, and I ordered a dish, and I asked, they ask mild, medium, hot, Thai hut, right? And the person taking my order, I said, I want Thai hut. And they were like,
Are you sure?
Yeah.
sure about that? And I was like, I'm 1,000% positive about that. So they left, they took my order, and they came back with the manager and goes, do you want Thai hut? I want Thai hut. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Are you sure? Are you sure? And they want it to be like, you're a white woman.
Yeah.
Like, do you want Thai hut? They went back. And I think it's hilarious, right? And so they go back, they bring up my dish, and I look over, and there is a crowd of like 7 like Thai workers watching me eat this dish. Like, oh my gosh, is she gonna be able to handle this? And I laughed, I joked, I was like, oh, it's a funny story, right? And my friend goes, this is what it's like for somebody like me every fucking day. That people are asking you, people are questioning, are you sure? Are you sure? And then people will watch you.
Yeah.
And they want you to fail, because they want you to fail.
Let me give you my example as
and I will have tears rolling down my fucking face before I say it's too hot.
Yeah.
And it struck me. I was like, that was a really funny story. And I was like, I can't imagine that being a daily occurrence.
Let me just tell you, I travel a lot, which means that I am diamond status with Delta, which means I get first class because I bought a fucking basic ticket, not because I bought a first class ticket. But it's always me and like a truckload of white men with like their luggage who are like gung-ho to get on.
Who work for Merrill Lynch or
exactly, where their job involves a lot of travel. Mine does too, but because you get a certain status, you just keep getting upgraded all the time. I cannot tell you how many times I've been in line in first class and someone's coming to me and goes, this is first class, right? And I'm like, are you going to ask for my boarding pass, or are you just going to assume? Bitch, ask for my boarding pass so you can see. Like, let me be wrong when you call for first class. Turn me away when I'm like basic. But don't come to me in the line before you even ask when I'm lined up for first class and be like, I don't want you to be embarrassed, but this is first class. This is like, it's a constant phenomenon. It's like over and over and over again. It's like, guys.
But in academia, especially, I mean, it must happen so much that there are probably instances where you don't even notice it. Like that.
I notice it. The biggest example is, teacher evals. The 2 biggest indicators of why you're going to get a good teacher evals is male and expected grade. However, there are many studies suggesting that Black women are far more likely to be bullied in academia. I have been bullied beyond belief in academia. The things that people try with me are so beyond what they would try with an older white male. It's unbelievable. I'm constantly trying to prove to people that I already know they know I'm competent, but somehow they feel like they can come after me because the institution will back them far more than whether or not they back older white males. I get tried by older white males all the time. And the biggest problem I have is that the same white older females who claim to be so liberal, they're kind of like, they don't know who to choose. They're like, I'm liberal and she's a Black female and I want to be down and woke. But my husband's an older white male and I identify with this guy. So there's always the struggle I'm dealing with these older white females who are on faculty with me across all the places I've been, where they don't really want to admit that maybe your Black femaleness is a factor here, because they would hate to think that an older white male is actually racist. So they're struggling with this concept, and you can see them fighting with it. And I remember saying with one of my really close confidants from Hopkins, who you know, Alicia, Rebecca German, and I said, here's what I don't understand. I don't really have access to the range of white men that you've had access to. Your dad's a white male, your brothers are white males, your husband is a white male. Do you ever just look over at him when you're complaining about male privilege and go, are you one of those guys who does X? I can't even really ask that question. I might go seek out a random white guy and be like, are you one of those guys? Why are you not asking the person literally next to you, who you have access to, your dad, your brother, your husband, your sons? Are you one of those guys who does this thing to women? Like, the level of access they have, I think, is unprecedented. So I'm a little bit sometimes confused about why there is this level of sexism. And this is just me being naive to the idea that white males having more power perhaps tend to be the ones more that can be effective at sexism against white women. Jess, I will ask you this. Can you imagine if we had the same level of sexism against us from Black males as white women have against them? We don't have this situation quite the same range, right? In fact, we are strong Black women who can do it all by ourselves. We don't need no man. So I'm always like, so you're gonna tell me you sleep next to this guy? You sleep next to this guy. You were raised by this guy. This guy's your sibling, and you're not fucking asking him, dude, what's going on? Why are you doing this shit? That's what I'd be asking him.
So, Alicia, to your point, I wrote this down. I was like, I can't afford to fuck up. Like, I'm trying to be serious, and here goes my mentor, you know, convulsing.
That's how I feel people of color feel.
No, I'm being straight up with you.
That's what I see. That's the
I can't afford to, let me just see, like, if this works out. Like, I have this idea, and let me see if it works. I don't have that privilege.
People aren't like, oh, fucking white people.
Exactly.
You're like, fucking Alicia.
And then on top of that, I think that hinders me in my ability to be flexible in my research, as far as my willingness to explore.
Outside the box.
Like, because one of my issues, like, one of the things Ianessa has said to me is like, yo, you're trying to get it right. You're trying to get the right answer instead of being open to having a conversation. And I think one of the issues is I don't feel comfortable being open enough to have a conversation because I can't afford to be wrong, because I don't have so many opportunities to correct myself. I know that, I was gonna say,
because we need people of color to be the ones to step outside the box, because you have that perspective to take us outside the box, right? Like,
yeah.
That's the catch-22 in the whole thing, is that if we want to expand our way of thinking and bring diverse thoughts, we need people of color, of different culture. It's not even color, cultures, backgrounds, whatever, to be the ones to take us there. So when you're afraid to take us there, it's like we're just in the same boat that we were.
Because the people judging the people taking you there are still the white majority. And so you can, I think it's easier to feel like I can go there when I've done, like I've proven myself. But right. But till then, the people judging you are still the people that, which is why I said I changed the way I think about the way I dress. I think about all of those things, because that's where, and now since in the last 2 years, maybe I wear Indian clothes to work.
Yeah.
I painted my office orange.
And it's not because it's because you just decided, like, this whole idea of like, when I arrive, it's like you finish your Ph.D, then it's just like, oh, I've arrived. No, I'll do that when I get tenure. Oh, I'll do that when I blah, 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 whatever, get my next grant. Like, when I put these boxes, and then all of a sudden you're retiring. And it's just like, shit, I never stepped outside the box.
So Alicia, I'm going to ask you this question, please. What do you think about, do you think that you would be have sharper, because you're already, there's no question, I think from anyone who interacts with you, that you belong here. But do you feel like you would benefit if you had some kind of disadvantage that was obvious, that would sharpen your blade? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, do you feel like, man, if I was Black, or if I was somebody who was stereotypically people assume was a lesbian, or if I was whatever in this field, that I could actually sharpen my blade more because of this idea that someone doesn't expect it from me? Do you think that you would, being forced to rise, the biggest racism issue, in my opinion, is low expectations.
Yeah.
For Black people. That is what's keeping them down, in my opinion. That this idea that you should be down here, and if you're at least this, that's good enough for a Black person. I don't live in that world. But do you feel like if you had to have even more constraints on you, that you could be better? Like when you say you go on a job, you're like, in the bag. Do you feel like if you had to really fight, that you could be better?
So like what you're saying is that I'm functioning at X capacity. If I had some sort of disadvantage, would it turbocharge me to take me to another level?
What do you think?
I do, because I think that I turbocharge myself, because I think about, you know, like I had a very underprivileged background, and I use that to charge myself a lot.
Internally, but people don't know that when you walk in the room.
Know it. Do I think it actually causes me to have a disadvantage? Not really. I mean, I was shell-shocked when I went to college, and everybody around me had taken AP classes, and I went to a really shitty high school, and like I immediately felt like, fuck, I am so far behind everybody else. So that was a different situation where I actually felt like it affected me, so I had to catch up pretty quick. But now,
but let's you had the same situation at UConn, except you look like Jess. So you did have the same background, and people think that of you. Like you can't even hide and be like, nobody has to know. Do you think that that additional layer where you're not just trying to prove it to yourself, but the people who you know when you walk in the room are thinking that of you? Do you think that maybe you would benefit?
I think it would turbocharge me like crazy, but I think that that's because of who I am. Like I think the difference between people that it does that to or doesn't that to, or people that are like, well, I'm just nobody or whatever. I think that's an individual basis. That has nothing to do with race or color or ethnicity or anything. It's who you are. For me personally, oh my God, I would have been like, listen here, motherfuckers. Like I would have been so supercharged to prove everybody wrong, because that's just my personality.
Can you explain again what you would have said in the room? You would have said, can you?
I would have T32.
I feel some kind of way when white people put the R in motherfuckers. Like I feel like some Samuel Jackson.
Motherfuckers.
Like ER with ER, like ER AH on the N word. I mean, that really is.
All right, guys, I gotta wrap this up. I gotta roll.
Me too. So, guys, do you have Anu closing words? Diversity, yes, and why?
Closing words, yes, and because. Well, because it makes us all better, right? And we just talked about for patients, for students, for ourselves, so people have more color in their lives, whether it's orange or brown. Pardon?
That was cute.
Oh, thank you.
Carlene.
Yeah. Yes to diversity, and the reason why is because it expands the conversation. It invites more people to the table. So let's talk.
Let's do it. Leash.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's important to reflect on. I think that the issue of diversity, it's easy to be like, yes, of course, diversity. But like, I think a lot of people can't answer why. You know, and I think that that is something to really think about, especially for white people, because I think that's something that's just like, well, of course I'm not racist. Of course I want diversity. Of course I want these things. It's such a, you know, it's just something so present in our culture right now. But I don't think a lot of people could really tell you how it would positively impact their workspace, their personal lives, everything. So I hope that this podcast gave a little insight into the ways that it can benefit those areas, and to maybe think about uniquely in your setting how it could benefit.
Yeah. So I think that, you know how you have curricular and extracurricular? I think diversity lives in the extracurricular. You know how when you apply for something, you have to say where your grades are, but you also have to say that you were on the swim team and, you know, you led this charge for camp and blah, blah, blah. And you look at those applications and you go, yeah, that's not a person who was obsessed with their grades, because being a clinician is not just about your grades and the documents you sign. It's about getting, you know, ownership or buy-in from that patient and their caregivers. To me, that's where diversity lives. It doesn't mean that I don't know that that was the hyoid bone in a video fluoroscopy.
Or it's a one-credit course on multicultural issues in grad school.
Yeah, to me, diversity is about having that extra layer of a skill that is a non-tangible thing. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of perceiving the world. That is
a soft skill.
Exactly. It's all those things to me that make somebody relatable and understandable, that you can actually go into almost at, you know, those people who can walk into anywhere and get people to like them. I don't know what that world is. That would be, to me, somebody who has a range of skills. So to me, that's what diversity is about. It's about having enough interactions with people where you realize the world is bigger than me and my little opinions, and that's fascinating. So I just want to say thank you guys for having a really candid conversation.
Thank you.
I really want that this conversation is the drop that leads to ripples that other people then take to their setting. And frankly, the best thing we can do is if somebody asks you a question about you and your culture, it doesn't have to be an attack. It doesn't have to be she asked me if I wash my hair. Look, hey, Ann, you know how many times I've been asked if I wash my hair from white people? Of course I wash my hair, God damn it. But
do you really?
The point is, sometimes people are asking and you can educate them and you can move on and you can actually be friends with people who you initially thought maybe had negative or ill will against you, and you can actually turn that around. So I would say that's the whole point of this conversation. Talk to your friends, talk to your family, and turn the shit around.
I just have one thing I want to say. My issue is whenever race comes up, that people of color have to find another way to, like, people of non-color have to find another way to say, but what about us? We're talking about SLPs so white, and then here we have, well, what about the men? Well, what about the gay people? It's like, can we just focus on the fact that there's not enough people of color, though? And let that just sit.
While that's
people want to be seen. It just comes back to that. People just want to be seen. It's not about discrediting anything. It's just everybody is
learn to listen.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
And you know, there are a lot of concepts we talked about in this last couple hours or so that are generalizable to other areas, but I promise you the next podcast on this general topic, not small, is going to be SLPs, so female. And I already have some people lined up who desperately want to talk about it, who send me emails like, I swear to God, if you talk about this, I want me and my penis there. You and your penis will be here. And I swear to God, your testosterone is going to rise to the occasion. But for now, we just wanted to follow up on these concepts. And thank you guys for listening. Hey, Jess, Leash, and Anu.
SLP so sober. We got to end.
So sober.
No.
I don't have my glass. My dog moved my glass away.
No?
So
Okay.
Candid. I really appreciate it. And you know what? We'll take in all your comments as we move forward. Okay, guys? Thanks for joining.
thank you.
Bye.